Before a sea was parted, before a staff turned into a serpent, there was a mother, a Hebrew woman defying a king. Her name was Jochebed, and her love rewrote the destiny of a nation. You're watching biblical stories, where the voices of ancient women rise again. We tell the untold tales of queens, mothers, and warriors who changed history through courage, faith, and sacrifice.
I was born into bondage with the weight of generations on my back, yet even as chains clanked and whips cracked around me, I learned how to carry hope in silence, how to hold on to promises older than pyramids, and how to trust a God I could not see. I was a daughter of Levi, a woman of no status, no crown, no voice. Yet I was chosen for something sacred, something dangerous, something eternal. They called it madness to bring children into this world of death, but when I felt life stirring inside me, I did not despair. I believed. Each night, I sang to the child within me, songs soaked in sorrow and sealed in faith, songs I had no guarantee he would ever hear with his own ears, and still I sang, because hope is louder than fear when whispered by a mother. In secret, I carried him beneath layers of linen and trembling, dodging Egyptian patrols, swallowing panic as neighbors were dragged away screaming, clutching empty arms, and burying newborns before they could take their first breath. I memorized every creak in the floor, every shadow that passed our door, every crack in the silence that could betray us, because with every heartbeat, I knew, if they found him, he would die, and so would I. I learned to wrap him in stillness, in my body, in my prayers, and when his tiny hand wrapped around my finger for the first time, I didn't weep. I made a vow that no decree, no Pharaoh, no soldier could break. I would not surrender my son without a fight, even if my only weapon was love. When 3 moons passed, and I could no longer hide his cries, I did the unthinkable. I crafted a basket, crude and soaked with pitch, but woven with every thread of my heart, and I laid my child inside as if placing him on an altar. I had no plan, only a prayer, no army, only the angels I could not see, but I pushed that basket into the Nile and turned my back, not because I lacked faith, but because faith means releasing what you cannot protect to the hands of the one who can. I stood at the water's edge longer than I should have, tracing the ripples that carried my boy away, and every step back toward home felt like tearing my soul in two. I sent Miriam to watch, to stand where I could not, because a mother's heart can only bear so much, and even though I had let him go, I had not let go of the promise that somehow he would live, and when the news came, that Pharaoh's daughter had lifted him from the water, that she had not turned him away, that she was seeking a nurse, I ran, not as a slave, not even as a mother, but as a woman stepping into a divine plot she could never have written on her own. I held him again, this child. Rescued by the river, fed from my own breast inside the house of the man who ordered his death, and I realized, God doesn't just protect, he rewrites stories with irony too perfect to be coincidence. He grew beneath golden ceilings and foreign gods, and though I could not shape his future, I shaped his roots, whispering the name of Yahweh into his soul, telling him not where he lived, but where he came from. I planted truth inside him like seeds hidden in desert sand, knowing someday they would rise, and even when he began to walk like them, speak like them, dress like them, I knew he did not belong to Egypt, he belonged to a promise older than Pharaoh's throne. And though my arms would one day release him for good, my faith never would, because I understood now, I was not just his mother, I was the vessel that carried a deliverer into the world. Years passed, and though I remained in the shadows, I watched the boy I birthed become a man torn between 2 worlds, the splendor of palaces and the cries of his people. I saw the tension in his steps, the unrest in his gaze, the quiet storms brewing in his spirit, and I knew then that the seeds I had sown were growing, that his heart could no longer ignore the blood in his veins or the ache of injustice in his bones. He had been raised as a prince, but he would never truly belong to Pharaoh's house, for the call on his life was not comfort, it was deliverance, and though I feared what that would cost him, I did not pray for his safety. I prayed for his purpose. The day he fled Egypt, I felt it in my body before the news reached me, like a cord snapping inside my chest. He had killed a man, an Egyptian, and now he was a fugitive, hunted by the very people who had once protected him. I wept not out of shame, but out of a deeper surrender, because I knew this too was part of the story, part of the wilderness that would strip him of Egypt's identity and clothe him in the rawness of destiny. I would never see his face again, never hold his hands, never know the sound of his footsteps at my door. But I believed, with a stubborn and sacred conviction, that God was not done with him. In the silence of years that followed, I held on to every memory like treasure. His first cry, his first smile, the way he looked at me before I pushed him into the Nile. I kept those moments alive not just for myself, but for the generations who would come after, because I wanted them to know that the story of Moses did not begin with plagues or miracles. It began with a mother who dared to defy a king, who chose faith over fear, who surrendered her child to the river and trusted heaven would do the rest. And in the quiet places of my heart, I whispered one prayer again and again. Let my son become what he was born to be. And then, stories began to spread like wildfire through the camps, of a man with a staff, of signs and wonders, of plagues shaking the foundations of Egypt, of a name once forgotten now spoken with awe, Moses. I listened, breath caught between belief and disbelief, and when I finally accepted that the child I once released into the river was now confronting Pharaoh himself, I fell to my knees and wept, not just for joy, but for the fulfillment of every silent prayer I had ever spoken. He was no longer just my son. He was the voice of a nation crying for freedom. They say he lifted his staff and waters turned to blood. They say frogs and fire rained from the sky. They say the gods of Egypt trembled and fell. But I remembered the boy who once clung to my shawl, whose tears I wiped away in secret, whose life I once protected with my own, and though I could not witness it with my eyes, I saw it clearly in my spirit. The God who preserved my son in a basket was now shaking the earth through his hands. And in that holy unraveling, I found peace, not because the pain was erased, but because the purpose was revealed. The night of the final plague, when death passed over our doors, I sat in stillness, candles flickering beside me, lamb's blood marking the threshold, and I realized, every tear, every sacrifice, every moment of hidden obedience had led to this liberation. We were not just escaping slavery. We were stepping into prophecy, and though my body was worn, my soul was alight with wonder. I had lived to see what I never dared to imagine, the beginning of freedom, carried on the shoulders of the boy I once released to the river. And as we left Egypt, walking not as fugitives but as a people delivered, I carried no treasures, no gold, no relics of the past, only the memory of a basket, a promise, and a God who had proven himself faithful beyond my wildest prayers. I looked at the sea ahead and the army behind, but I did not fear. I had already seen what my God could do with rivers, and when Moses raised his staff and the waters parted, I whispered, "He was always yours, not as a surrender, but as a song." If you remember nothing else of my story, remember this. Sometimes the greatest acts of faith are not done in the spotlight, but in the quiet obedience of a mother's heart. I did not part seas or call down plagues, but I believed, and belief was enough to alter history. I was not a queen, not a prophetess, not a warrior. I was just a woman who trusted God with the thing I loved most, and in doing so, I became part of a miracle. And maybe today, you stand at the edge of your own Nile, holding something too precious to let go, too fragile to protect on your own. May you find the courage to release it, knowing that what you entrust to God never truly leaves your hands. It just moves into His. The river may be deep, but His promises are deeper still, and what you offer in faith, He multiplies in purpose.
Thank you for joining us on Biblical Stories. If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing for more voices from the women of Scripture whose faith shaped eternity. Their stories aren't over, and neither is yours.